Before we start, let me tell you something very simple. This is not a channel for pretty stories. WinOwl is a place where we open wounds that were almost always covered up, where we talk about betrayals that could have happened to any of us, and about decisions that can cost you your soul. If you like being spoken to without anesthesia, subscribe to WinOwl right now, hit like on this video, and share it with that person you know is carrying things they never talk about. Here you're going to find stories that don't fade easily. Today I'm going to tell you the story of a woman who came back from the dead in more than one way. They wrote her off as dead on a luxury yacht, but the sea sent her back alive into the arms of a family that couldn't even afford to fill their fridge. While her son and daughter-in-law were crying in front of cameras and lawyers, she was alive, watching everything from the shadows and gathering proof to sink them. And in the middle of that Cold War over an $8 million inheritance, something showed up that nobody was expecting, a guy like me, and a love that makes people uncomfortable, because it arrives when she no longer believes she deserves anything at all. If you stay till the end, you're going to have to answer something for yourself. What would you do if the person who tried to kill you was your own son? I'm talking slowly because if I talk fast, I feel like I'll shatter. My name doesn't matter that much, but I'm going to tell you anyway. My name is Julian. 43 years old, a fisherman since I was 16. My hands look older than my face, and my face has already carried too many sons to pretend it's still young. I'm talking to you from a small living room, with a noisy fan and a wobbly chair. No lawyer asked me for this statement. Nobody is forcing me. I'm doing it because I've had this story stuck in my throat for months, and either I let it out, or it finishes rotting me from the inside. And because you, on the other side, might need to hear it to decide whether money is really worth as much as you think. It all started one dawn that smelled of gasoline, salt, and old rain. When I say we, I mean my younger brother, Sergio, and my nephew had gone out to fish at night because the day before we'd caught almost nothing. The boat moved heavy, like the sea was in a bad mood. I was quiet, like almost always. Sergio was talking about fuel prices, about how we couldn't keep up, how we owed 2 months of electricity. Normal things in our life. And suddenly, in the dark, we saw something that wasn't normal. At first it just looked like a stain, just another lump in that sea that sometimes spits out garbage. But when we got closer, I saw an arm. Pale skin, fingers swollen from the water, an expensive watch that didn't belong in a place like that. Tell me, if you see a body floating in the early hours of the morning, what do you do? Do you pretend you didn't see it and keep going, afraid of complicating your life? Or do you go closer, even when there's nothing in it for you? I'm no hero. But I'm not a coward either. I gave the order to go closer. The lump was a woman. Gray hair plastered to her face, a linen dress stuck to her body. Lips purple. Eyes closed. Sergio said, "She's dead, Julian. Leave her." But I saw a tiny tremor in her neck, the faintest thread of air. We hauled her into the boat however we could. Her body was ice cold, heavy. I put my hand on her chest and there was something, very little, but there was life. I did what I'd seen on TV, pressure, mouth to mouth. I don't know if I did it right or wrong. I just know that suddenly she coughed, spat up seawater and stayed there, gasping, staring at the black sky like she was waking up from an endless sleep. That's when I really saw her for the first time. She wasn't just any woman. She had the features of someone who'd led a comfortable life, cared for hands, even if they were wrinkled, a necklace that still caught the light in the dark, a way of looking that didn't ask permission. Even half dead, there was something about her, authority, I guess. "Easy," I told her. "You're safe. We found you. You're alive." She looked at me, not understanding. Her lips moved, barely, and she whispered something I didn't quite catch in that moment. It sounded like a name, or a broken word. Luis. I didn't know it then, but that name was going to haunt this story. We took her home, because calling an ambulance meant getting mixed up with police, paperwork, questions. And when you're a poor man, they teach you that your life is simpler if the authorities don't know you exist. Maybe you would have done the opposite. Or would you be scared of complicating things too? My sister Marta met us at the door, frightened. We all live crammed into an old house, painted over the damp patches again and again. She saw the woman and said, "She looks like some rich lady." And I just answered, "She looks like a person, and she almost died on us." We laid her on my bed. Her skin was cold, her lips cracked. We changed her out of the wet clothes and into an old t-shirt of mine. I had to look away while we undressed her. Not out of fake modesty, but out of respect. Even like that, half unconscious, you could tell this was a woman who was used to people keeping a certain distance when they looked at her, not to being just a body stretched out on some stranger's bed. When she finally woke up fully, it was already midday. Light was coming in through the broken window, sliced by cheap curtains. The fan made a low, rough noise. She opened her eyes slowly, like someone afraid of what they're about to see. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "In my house," I answered. "I'm Julian. The last thing I remember is I was out fishing and we found you in the sea." She stayed quiet for a few seconds. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't make the scene you'd expect from someone who just almost drowned. She closed her eyes again, took a deep breath, and asked, "Am I naked?" "No. You've got my t-shirt on. My sister changed you." She nodded, calm. "Good. Thank you." She pushed herself up a little. The collar of the shirt slipped to the side, just enough for me to see the red mark on her shoulder, like someone had dug their fingers in hard right before pushing her. The bruise was shaped like a hand. I froze. "She's got a bruise here," I said, pointing without touching. "That doesn't look like a fall." She looked at her shoulder, ran her fingers over the skin. She didn't seem surprised. She just clenched her jaw, like she was confirming something she already knew. "It wasn't a fall," she said at last. "Someone pushed me." That's when I knew my life was about to get tangled up with hers. Let me ask you something. If someone lies in your bed and confesses that someone tried to kill her, do you get up and throw her out of your house? Or do you stay and listen, even knowing you're stepping into a story that could blow your life apart? Her name was Marian. 58 years old. Widowed a little over a year. I'm not going to say her last name, but believe me when I tell you, if you heard it, you'd know I'm talking about people who show up in magazines, not on lists of unpaid bills. Her husband, Norman, had been a very rich businessman. Not we live comfortably rich. Rich like Yacht, houses in different countries, watches worth more than my entire neighborhood. He died a year ago. He left everything to me, or almost everything, she told me, her voice slow, like every sentence was a heavy brick. She talked about inheritances, foundations, trusts. Words that, in my world, only come out of the TV. I asked just enough, because I didn't want to be that nosy guy who only gets close because something shines. As the days went by, because Marian didn't leave in an hour, or in two, she stayed, I started to understand the structure of the tragedy. In short, there were $8 million at stake. 8. It's such a big number that my brain treats it like a joke. That money was supposed to be transferred from an account overseas to a foundation in Marian's name, with her son Luis as beneficiary after her death. That's how Norman had set it up. But papers can be moved. Greed can too. Luis, her only son, married a woman named Elvira. Beautiful, young, ambitious. And Elvira had a mother who could smell money from miles away. A woman named Regina, who knew how to twist laws, lawyers, and weak hearts. Luis was always meek, Marian told me one afternoon, sunlight slipping in through the window and drawing a line across her face. He never had a strong will. And I never taught him how to have one. I overprotected him. And someone like Elvira sees that and doesn't let it slide, she uses it. Let me ask you, have you ever watched someone weak-willed fall into the hands of someone stronger, colder? Doesn't it almost feel inevitable that it ends badly? The plan was simple, at least in theory, convince Marian, fragile, alone, grieving, to change certain parts of the will, to move some funds around. Little by little, isolate her, make her feel like a burden, like she was losing her memory, like she was no longer fit to handle her own money. Meanwhile, behind her back, Elvira and her mother met with trusted lawyers. At first, Marian trusted them. She was her daughter-in-law. She was her son's wife. I wanted to love her, she told me. I wanted her to be the daughter I never had. And here's something I want you to really listen to, because you're going to see it repeat itself in a lot of stories. Blind love, mixed with guilt, is perfect soil for manipulation. Marian carried guilt for having been a wife more focused on her husband than on her son. She admitted it without sugarcoating it. When Norman died, that guilt crashed down on her. So when Luis started coming by less often, when he let Elvira steer his life, Marian didn't complain. She felt she deserved it, that it was punishment for not having been more present. That's how I ended up on the yacht, she said, staring straight at me. They'd invited her on a family outing on Norman's yacht. They told her it would be just her son, and Elvira. That they needed to talk about important things, but that above all it would be a day to heal. You tell me, if your son tells you he wants to spend a day with you on the yacht that used to be your dead husband's, would you suspect something? Or would you cling to the idea that he's finally trying to get closer? The yacht was almost a symbol of her marriage. She'd spend weekends there, anniversaries, fights and reconciliations with Norman. Stepping aboard again was like walking into a memory. It started off well. Wine, food, strained laughter. Elvira wore a light dress, one of those that cling to your skin in the wind, and she smelled of expensive perfume. Luis was drinking too much, dodging his mother's gaze. The details Marian gave me were so precise that sometimes, when I think back on them, I feel like I was there. The harsh white midday light reflected on the water, the hum of the engine, the gentle rocking. Elvira leaning in to pour more wine, her hand brushing Luis's with a familiarity that hurt Marian and soothed her at the same time. Finally, someone had chosen him. Finally, someone was looking at him the way she never knew how. The conversation got heavier. They talked about the will, the foundation, how hard it was to manage so much money alone, at her age. Luis doesn't want anything for himself, Mama, Elvira said, her voice soft, almost sweet. He just wants to help you take that weight off your shoulders. A woman your age needs peace. That phrase stuck in Marian like a splinter, a woman your age. She was 58, not 80. She was still strong, she walked, she read, she made decisions. But Elvira talked as if she were already half gone. There came a moment when Luis was alone with his mother on deck. The wind was blowing through his hair, and Marian looked at him the way she used to when he was a child falling asleep on the couch, bare feet hanging off the edge. Luis, tell me the truth, she asked him. Is this what you want? For me to change everything so you get the money sooner, so Elvira can handle it? Luis didn't look her in the eyes. He kept his gaze on the water. I just want you to be okay, Mama, he murmured. Elvira understands these things, you don't. Sometimes you seem confused. Confused, she repeated. That's when she felt the first stab that wasn't physical. They argued. Not shouting, but at that freezing temperature that hurts more. Marian told him she felt like they wanted to strip away the little she still had of her own life. Luis kept insisting they were only trying to help her. Between one sentence and the next, Elvira walked in and out of the cabin, pretending not to listen, but sharpening her ears. Until the moment came. It was quick. Marian walked over to the railing, looking at the horizon, trying to breathe. The yacht swayed harder, the sky was starting to cloud over. Luis, if I bother you both that much, say it to my face, she said, without turning around. But don't treat me like I'm crazy. She heard footsteps behind her. She thought it was her son. She smiled, with a bone-deep weariness, and turned, maybe to ask for a hug. But it wasn't Luis. It was Elvira. And there was nothing soft in her face. This is hurting all of us, Marian, she said. You don't understand that you're holding on to something that's no longer yours. Marian felt a hand on her shoulder. Hard. Too hard to be a loving gesture. No, was all she managed. The shove was sharp, calculated. There was no stumble. No accident. There was a choice. The water swallowed her like an animal. The contrast between the warm air and the cold sea cut her breath. She heard, far away, a scream that might have been Luis's, or might have been only her own fear. Then everything became bubbles and darkness. I didn't want to die, Miriam told me, without tears. But I didn't fight much either. A part of me gave up. The current did its job. The yacht went on its way, and they went on with their plan. Later they'd say she slipped. That they tried to save her. That it was a tragedy. What they didn't account for was the sea's whim. It threw her right toward where we were. Let me ask you another question. If you were Louise, and you saw your wife push your mother into the sea, what would you do? Stop her? Jump in after her? Or close your eyes and let the money decide for you? That night, while Miriam told me all of this, the room was a rectangle of shadows. The light from the hallway barely slipped in through the half-open door. I was sitting in a chair beside her. She was half lying on my bed, my long t-shirt hanging down to her knees. The neckline slipped a little when she moved, showing her jutting collarbone, the beginning of her chest, skin marked by that mix of age and dignity that's not easy to describe. There was nothing pornographic about that scene, but there was a strange tension. As if two worlds were brushing against each other, hers, of luxury and betrayal, and mine, of dust and salt. If I go back like nothing happened, they'll kill me for real, she said. I have to disappear, or show up in the right way. That's when I started to realize Miriam wasn't just a victim. She was a strategist too. For days, we didn't leave the neighborhood with her. We got her simple clothes, cotton pants, loose blouses. With her hair tied back and cheap sandals, she looked like any of the neighbors going out to buy bread. But then she spoke, and it was obvious she wasn't from there. The old TV in the dining room, screen stained a little green, became our window into the play they were putting on outside. After 2 days, the news showed Luis in a dark suit, eyes red, giving a statement to the cameras about the terrible loss of his mother in a tragic accident at sea. Elvira stood beside him, dark glasses on, one hand on her husband's arm. The image of the compassionate daughter-in-law mourning her husband's mother. Miriam stared at the screen. She didn't blink. They're good actors, I said, unable to help myself. Regina's an even better director, she murmured. Regina, Elvira's mother, didn't show up much on TV. But she showed up just enough, going into a law office, coming out of a notary's, consoling Luis with an almost motherly gesture. She's the one pulling the strings, Miriam explained. She's done this before with other rich old men. She just went too far this time. How would you react, watching your own funeral on television? Watching your son cry over a death he knows wasn't an accident? Around that time, something started that I wasn't expecting. Talking to Miriam became my routine. It wasn't just compassion. It was also fascination. She analyzed every gesture, every word in the interviews they did with Luis and Elvira. She broke down the legal moves, the phrases they used to prepare the ground. When they say in honor of my mother's memory, I'll carry out her wishes, what they're really saying is don't look too closely at the paperwork, she'd tell me, eyes still fixed on the TV. I listened, and at the same time I watched her. Her hair was no longer plastered in filthy. Marta had washed it and now braided it back. Her skin had some color again. Her hands still trembled sometimes, but it wasn't from weakness anymore, it was from caged rage. One night, the power went out. Happens all the time in the area. The fan stopped dead, and the house sank into semi-darkness. Marta and the others went to bed early, exhausted. I stayed in the room, a candle burning on the little table. Miriam couldn't sleep. She shifted on the bed, restless. I can't stop seeing their faces, she said quietly, like she didn't want to wake the past. The heat grew thick without the fan. The air stuck to our skin. I took off my shirt, staying in just my pants. Not to show off. Out of necessity. Sweat slid down my back. She looked at me, and for a moment her gaze rested on my torso, on the small scars from years of working at sea. It wasn't a look of wild desire. It was a kind of sad curiosity, like someone seeing a body that's had to work in ways hers never did. Sorry, she murmured. I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be taking up your bed, your house, your life. If you weren't here, you'd be at the bottom of the sea, I answered. I'd rather have my mattress on the floor than my conscience empty. She pushed herself up a little. The candle cast warm shadows over her face, softening the wrinkles, giving her a kind of tired beauty. The t-shirt's neckline had loosened, showing more skin than she ever would have in any elegant living room. Sweat made her collarbone shine. Doesn't it make you angry, she asked suddenly, that I have so much money, and yet I'm the one sleeping in your bed, while the people who tried to kill me are the ones sleeping in mine? The question cut right through me. It used to, I admitted, after thinking about it. When I was younger, I hated people like you. I'd see them drive past in their cars and think you were all the same. Now, I don't know. Sometimes I think people like you have other kinds of poverty. She fell silent. Our eyes held a little longer than they should have. The silence grew heavier, but not uncomfortable. I could feel the heat from the candle, the distant buzz of mosquitoes, the sound of some dog outside. Her breathing was slow, but it sped up just a little every time I moved. There was a moment, just a second, when I thought about moving closer. Sitting on the edge of the bed, maybe, touching her hand, telling her she wasn't alone. It wasn't some animal urge. It was something stranger, a mix of care, attraction, and respect. But I didn't. Because I saw in her eyes that she was still too broken. And because I know myself too well, I know that when you get close to someone in that state, it's not always really for them. Be honest, would you have gone closer? Would you have allowed yourself to love or desire someone right in the middle of their worst war? In the days that followed, Miriam's strategy started to take shape. She didn't want impulsive revenge. She wanted to dismantle something bigger than her own personal tragedy. Regina, as we found out, had a past very few knew about. She'd been an advisor to several wealthy old men, always appearing as a family friend. In 2 cases, the inheritance ended up in the hands of very young people, new partners who had conveniently appeared in the last years of those men's lives. There were rumors, nothing proven. But where there's smoke. If I only focus on my case, they'll say I'm a bitter crazy woman, Miriam reasoned. I need to show that this isn't an accident, it's a pattern. How did she do it? With something I don't have, contacts. Not many, but enough. An old friend, a lawyer, whom she called from a pay phone after making me swear she wouldn't give out our address. A former manager from one of her companies who still respected her. A nurse who had worked for years in an expensive nursing home. Sometimes I went with her, from a distance. We'd walk together up to a certain corner, and then she'd go on alone, dressed like any widow from the neighborhood. I'd wait for her at some corner, in a cheap cafe. Sometimes she came back serious, papers in hand. Sometimes she came back trembling, eyes glassy, but proud. On one of those outings, we had a moment that marked something between us. It had rained all day. The streets were still wet, puddles reflecting the yellow streetlights. Miriam left a meeting with her lawyer looking clearly exhausted. Her blouse clung slightly to her body from the damp. We walked together under a broken umbrella, sharing the tiny patch of space that stayed dry. The fabric sagged so low it almost forced us to bring our faces closer. I could smell her perfume, not an expensive one, not the kind she'd have worn with Norman, but the one Marta had lent her, something simple, smelling of cheap flowers mixed with the scent of rain and her skin. Her arm brushed against mine with every step. Now and then, her fingers bumped into my fingers. That tiny jolt, that touch repeated again and again, built up a tension neither of us named. At one point, a car drove past too fast, splashing dirty water toward us. Instinctively, I grabbed her by the waist and pulled her to my side, pressing her against my chest so the wave wouldn't hit her full on. She grabbed my shoulder, her body tight against mine, her lips very close to my neck. I felt her breath on my skin. Just a second. But it was a very long second. When I set her back in place, we both avoided looking each other in the eye. My heart was pounding. Hers too, you could tell by the way she swallowed. We can't afford any more complications, she said at last, with a sad half-smile. We've got enough already, I answered. That was our way of admitting, without saying it out loud, that something was happening. A strange kind of love, born in conspiracy, in danger, in a borrowed bed. Do you think it's wrong for two people to find each other right in the middle of a disaster? Or is disaster sometimes the only place where we dare to really feel anything? Meanwhile, Luis and Elvira kept up their performance. They organized a memorial mass for Miriam. Important guests, discreet press, tears measured out just right. Regina made sure the speech was flawless. They talked about irreparable pain, about the emptiness a mother leaves behind, about continuing her legacy. Behind those phrases, the fine print of contracts and transfers shuffled into place. They'd arranged, with suspicious speed, access to certain accounts to cover funeral costs, debts, taxes. Movements that, when added up, edged dangerously close to the 8 million mark. Miriam's lawyer friend, a tough woman with tired eyes, managed to put some things on hold, citing doubts about the circumstances of the death. But Regina knew how to apply pressure. They weren't going to wait long. The key scene, the one you want to hear, came weeks later. It was an official meeting at the family home. The house that had belonged to Miriam and Norman, now turned into a stage. Luis would be there, Elvira, Regina, the notary, a couple of lawyers. The goal, to sign a packet of documents that would consolidate the transfer of properties and funds. Also there, invisible, would be everything I've just told you. It's today, Miriam told me that morning, in my room. She was getting ready slowly. She wore a simple black dress that suited her better than she thought. Her hair was pulled back in a low bun. Discreet earrings Marta had lent her. "Are you sure?" I asked, leaning against the wall. There was a knot in my stomach. "Not entirely," she replied. "But at this point, the only way to live is to stop running." She came closer to me, closer than she usually did. Dressed in black like that, with her eyes steady, she looked like a sharper version of the woman we'd pulled from the sea. She stopped so close I could see the tiny lines around her mouth, the ones you get from pressing your lips together so you don't cry. "Julian, if something goes wrong and I don't come back, I want you to know that you're the one who made these days worth it. You made me feel alive. Not like a victim." I didn't kiss her. Even though I wanted to. I just took her hand and squeezed it tightly. Her skin was warm, a little damp. "You're going to come back," I told her. "And you're not going to die in that house again. You're going back to take your name back." It was the most intimate goodbye we ever had. And maybe because of that, the most erotic too, not because of what we did, but because of everything we didn't do. Has it ever happened to you that the kiss you don't give weighs more than the one you do? I didn't go with her. Her lawyer would be with her. The police, discreetly warned, would be on alert. There was evidence, recordings of conversations Miriam had had earlier with Elvira, text messages, statements from employees, documents suggesting Regina's pattern with other elderly people. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. I stayed home, pacing back and forth, my heart pounding like a boat in rough seas. Sergio kept asking what was wrong with me. I dodged the questions. Marta, more intuitive, just said, "You fell in love with the rich lady, didn't you?" I didn't answer. Silence is sometimes a very loud yes. Now I want you to picture the scene at Miriam's house. The main living room, with its expensive furniture, soft rugs, landscape paintings of places nobody actually walked. Luis, in a suit, seated at the head of the table. Elvira, flawless, beside him. Regina in a two-piece suit, controlled smile. The notary opening the folder with the documents. The lawyers straightening their papers. "We're sorry to have to do this at such a painful time," one of them would say. "But life goes on, and there are matters that must be settled." Luis would nod, wearing a sad expression. Elvira would take his hand, as if holding him up under the weight of so much suffering. Right about the moment the notary began to explain how important the signature was, the front door would open. The exact details Miriam told me later, but I saw them in my head as I listened. Heels on marble. The soft echo. A murmur from the housekeeper, "Senora." A silence falling over the table, heavy, off. And then Marian's voice. Not shouting. Not theatrical. Just present. How strange to see so many people gathered in my house, talking about me as if I no longer existed. If you were there, what would you feel hearing the voice of someone you thought was dead? Guilt? Fear? Rage because your plan is collapsing? Luis, from what they told me, went sheet white. The pen slipped from his hand. Elvira took half a second longer to react. First she truly widened her eyes, she wasn't that good an actress, then the mask put itself back on. Marian. She stammered. How? Regina was the quickest to try to seize control again. This must be a misunderstanding, she said, standing up. We thought you. Thought I was a lifeless body at the bottom of the sea, Marian finished for her, walking toward the table. Yes. That's what you thought. Or what you wanted to believe. Dressed in black, thinner, her skin still marked by the neighborhood sun, she looked less glamorous than before. But she had something she'd lost in all those years of comfort, an edge. She stopped in front of the table, braced her hands on the edge, leaning forward just slightly. Her eyes locked on her son. Luis, she said, holding his name in the air. Do you know what the worst part of almost drowning is? It's not the water. It's remembering that while you were swallowing the sea, your son was right there, and did nothing. Luis opened his mouth several times, like a fish out of water. No words came. It was an accident, he managed at last, almost in a whisper. You slipped. Marian let out a dry laugh, without a trace of joy. Elvira's stronger than she looks. When someone really pushes you, you don't slip, you fall. And you were there. You saw it. A tight silence spread through the room. The notary glanced from one face to another, not sure whether to put the papers away or press on. That's when the other piece of the puzzle appeared, the police. They didn't storm in like in the movies, breaking down doors. They walked in calmly, showing a warrant. Marian's lawyer came with them. Ms. Regina, Ms. Elvira, Mr. Luis, one of the officers said, we've received complaints and evidence regarding a possible attempted homicide and a scheme of financial exploitation of elderly individuals. We need you to come with us. Regina shot to her feet. This is an outrage, she said, trying to keep her composure. You have nothing. Marian's lawyer spoke then, with the coolness of someone holding the winning hand. We have recordings of conversations in which you, Regina, and you, Elvira, discuss how convenient it would be for Mrs. Marian to stop getting in the way. We have documents showing suspicious transfers of funds from other elderly people who died in questionable circumstances. And we have the victim alive, willing to testify. Elvira turned to Luis, seeking support. Luis was staring at his mother, undone. Tell them it was an accident, Elvira begged, dropping her voice, clinging to his arm. Tell them she slipped, that you saw it. That was the final test for him. The moment he had to choose. What he did was maybe the least heroic and the most human thing, he said nothing. He didn't defend Elvira, but he didn't launch into a speech of regret either. He just froze, staring at his mother with a mix of terror, shame, and something strange, relief. Because sometimes, when you've lived inside a lie for too long, watching it collapse is terrifying, but it's also a kind of freedom. Marian looked at him with a hardness only a wounded mother can have. I'm not going to lie for you, she said. And I'm not going to save you again either. Luis was arrested along with Elvira and Regina, at least while the investigation went on. The exact charges, the legal details, those got more and more complicated with time. Some lawyers managed to reduce certain things, others not so much. This isn't a movie, in real life, justice shows up halfway. Marian didn't get perfect revenge. Some of them pled guilty to lesser charges to avoid long trials. The newspapers talked about the case for a few days, then moved on. But something did change, Regina's network was exposed. Other families of elderly people found the courage to speak up. Wills were reviewed, contracts examined. Not all the damage was undone, but some of it was stopped. Do you think that's enough? Or does justice that arrives late and incomplete not deserve to be called justice at all? While all of that was happening in courtrooms, Marian started coming back to my house some nights. Not as a fugitive anymore, but as, I don't even know what word to use, a friend. A woman who no longer had a clear place in the world. The first time she came back, she was different. She had sold the yacht. She'd frozen some assets. She'd made choices that left her with less money, but more control. Even so, she was still rich, at least compared to me. She walked into the house carrying a grocery bag full of things we almost never buy: good cheese, all kinds of fruit, decent coffee. Marta hugged her like you hug a sister who's finally come home. That night, we were back in my room again, sitting on the bed. I no longer felt like some intruder in her life, she no longer felt like a stranger in mine. So what are you going to do now? I asked. Live with what's left, she answered, looking down at her hands. And learn not to depend on someone else to exist. Not on Norman, not on Luis, not on anyone. Then she looked at me, and added. Not even on you. Even though I love you more than I should. That sentence went through me, but in a different way than it would have before. I don't want to be your life raft, I told her quietly. I want to be someone who walks beside you if you're walking too. We let a long silence stretch out. In that silence, our hands found each other, almost out of habit by then. It wasn't some explosive gesture. It was a calm decision. Our fingers interlaced, the warmth of her palm. The night breeze slipping in through the window, barely shifting the curtain. She rested her head on my shoulder. I felt her hair brush my cheek, her breathing slowly falling into rhythm with mine. There was no urgency, no rush. Just two people who had been through too much, allowing themselves a little peace. If you're waiting for me to describe some wild, overflowing sex scene, you're not going to hear it. What happened between Marian and me was more sober. More in tune with our scars. Our bodies got to know each other slowly, on other nights, with respect. With clumsiness sometimes. With desire, of course, but also with care. What matters isn't the description of those moments, but what they meant, for her, feeling wanted again without being used, for me, stepping out of the role of savior and into that of partner. Do you think someone who tried to kill you, even if they didn't succeed, deserves your forgiveness? Marian asked herself that question many times. She never heard much directly from Luis again. Through lawyers, she found out he had accepted part of the charges, that he'd allowed Regina and Elvira to be investigated, that he'd cooperated. Not out of pure repentance, maybe, but out of fear, exhaustion, the instinct to save what he could. Motives aren't always pure. One day, months later, she got a letter from him. Handwritten. Just a few lines. He didn't say "I'm sorry" outright. He wrote things like, "I didn't know how to stop her, I was a coward, I understand if you never want to see me again." Marian showed me the letter, sitting at our table, a cup of coffee in front of her. Should I answer it? She asked. I took a deep breath before replying. I'm not the one who gets to tell you whether to forgive him or not. The only thing I'd say is, decide what you need in order to sleep in peace. Not what he needs. She nodded. Folded the letter carefully, like someone folding up a memory that still hurts. I don't hate him, she said slowly. And that's already something. She didn't write back. At least not yet. She didn't change her will to leave him anything either. But she did leave a small note among her papers: if one day my son proves, through his life, that he is no longer the man he was, I want the possibility of helping him to be considered. Not a blank check. A door left slightly open. And now I've come to the end of this testimony. Marian and I don't live in a fairy tale. We argue, we doubt, we drift apart sometimes. There are days when she feels guilty for being with me and not with someone from her world. There are days when I feel small next to her past, her money, her choices. But when we lie down in the same bed, the bed that once belonged to a fisherman who pulled a woman from the sea, and we turn off the light, there's a different kind of silence. A silence that doesn't weigh the way it used to, a silence that doesn't smell like death, but like shared exhaustion. Sometimes, in the early hours, I wake up and find her awake too, staring at the ceiling. "What are you thinking about?" I ask. "About what my life would have been like if that push had never happened," she answers. "Better?" I press. "I don't know," she says, turning toward me. "Maybe more comfortable. But less awake." And then she holds me, pressing her forehead to my chest, breathing slowly. I stroke her hair, feeling the warm weight of her body against mine, without needing any more words. Maybe, in the end, that's all we really get, not total justice, not perfect revenge, not absolute forgiveness. Just the possibility of sleeping a little more peacefully than before. And that is already something. Now it's your turn. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done in Miriam's place? Would you have gone back to your house to confront your son and daughter-in-law, or would you have disappeared forever into your new life? Do you think Luis deserves a second chance? And what would you do with a love that shows up right after someone tried to kill you for money? I want to read your advice, your judgments, your similar stories. This space is for that, to think together, even when it hurts. If this story stirred something inside you, subscribe to the WinOwl channel, like this video, and share it with someone who has their own family ghosts. Maybe, by listening to it, they'll find a different way to look at them. We'll hear each other in the next story. And in the meantime, remember this: sometimes the bravest thing isn't surviving the push, it's deciding what you're going to do with the life you have left afterward.